Broadcasting live from the IRSMedic studios, it's Parental Advisory. And thanks for joining us today. Anthony, today we're joined by a very special guest, Keith Redmond.
Yeah.
Now,
Keith is really out there. He's really pushing a lot of organizing an effort to defeat FATCA.
Yes.
And he has a huge following.
Yeah. We've talked so many times about issues that affect Americans living and working overseas. There's so many things we could discuss, but today there's some, we're going to try to stick to some really important topics. We want to talk about the craziness of FATCA, which is the Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act, about how the fight for the rights of Americans overseas and others associated affected populations is bringing Keith. He'll actually be testifying in front of Congress in January, and how, we want to talk about the new political climate, how it may affect FATCA and other taxation laws. And Keith is really the perfect person to talk to us today. He is currently International Senior Consultant at Leadership Across Borders. He's worked in the life sciences industry globally for 20 plus years doing communications, advocacy, and government relations work. He's a founding member of Circle K2, an international think tank. And Keith really does extensive work globally. He helps to address serious problems affecting personally and professionally about the 9 million overseas and associated populations by, the Americans, by addressing the untenable taxation issues like the U.S. practice of citizen-based taxation, FATCA, the enforcement tool of citizen-based taxation and its tax treaties. He talks about FAST Act, U.S. passport revocation, U.S. nationality laws as it affects accidental Americans. So, Keith, it just sounds like you're a pretty busy guy.
Well, when it comes to these particular issues, yes, because they are so important to address because of the untenable situation the populations that you mentioned are in as a result of these U.S. government policies being implemented in countries around the world.
Now, Keith, what would you say that is driving your passion behind this? Because it takes a lot of energy. So what's really driving it?
Well, I would say a couple things. One, I am an American overseas. I am based in Paris, France. I'm currently in Washington, D.C. right now. And as a result, these are issues that are near and dear to me, just because I happen to be a member of the population that's being affected. And also, it is a serious injustice being committed against a large segment of the American population, as well as populations of other countries.
Yes.
And it's just not right. And people need to speak up about it.
And I've been
very vocal and continue to be so.
That's how we found you, is your Facebook page, which is an awesome tool, American Expatriates. And I've said this to Karen Alpert. We spoke to her the other day about the Australian U.S. superannuation funds. And, what I like about the work you're doing, Keith, is you see the injustice and you don't make a Facebook page to complain about it. You are taking lots of actions to actually try to make these changes happen.
Yeah, you got to direct that anger somehow in a productive way. And that's fantastic that you've been able to do that and get yourself in front of Congress and get all of these, that there's so much anger around, and, we feel somewhat limited what we can do. How do you tackle the IRS that, here's a law that's been passed that nobody knows exists? Except the very few people it affects. So how can you possibly do that when people don't even know it's there? And if you asked, an American you pull a random American off the street and say, hey, if you made money overseas, is that taxable by the IRS? I would say 8 out of 10 will tell you no. Mm-hmm. So that's really the challenge: is how do you educate the public when the baseline is just a tremendous amount of ignorance?
Yeah.
Yeah, and and it has to be the education and informing has to be done with different audiences on many different levels. And keep in mind, you happen to be speaking with one individual who has a fire in his belly in addressing these issues, but I'm not alone. There are a number of people like Karen Alpert and individuals up in Canada, back home in France, in the Netherlands, in Italy, and it's growing. The anger. Yeah. That because of this untenable situation.
I have a rule: never cry at work. But here at the firm, we've had a couple clients come in, And they tell us how basically FATCA has just ripped their lives apart. And it really has taken, there's been a few tears here because, you hear their stories and it breaks my heart. And trying to help them, I think we have the same passion you do in that, all right, this really sucks. Now what are we going to do? How are we going to spread the word?
Yeah.
So I'm just so glad you're here.
Yeah. And I think it's important to note that, it's not FATCA alone.
Mm-hmm.
FATCA in and itself has its serious issues, but it's as a result of being the enforcement tool of the U.S. practice of citizenship-based taxation, which is ruining, and this is not hyperbole, but financially ruining people's lives and their families.
Yeah.
Now, did you want to talk about a specific example of anyone in particular,
Well, there's certainly so many examples out there.
I'm sure, right.
I know the one gentleman whom I know quite well, Daniel Kutel, who is a U.S. military veteran, and he lives in Switzerland. He's just an average guy like all of us, and he has a wife and kids. And when FATCA was implemented in Switzerland, as a result, he was going to have his mortgage rescinded on his home because the bank that was holding the mortgage decided that they did not want to deal with Americans whatsoever. And that's the modus operandi currently in Switzerland as well as other countries.
Wow.
So Daniel wrote letters to the VA, the Veterans Administration,
mm-hmm.
to his senators and congressmen back in the United States, to a plethora of individuals in the State Department and other places, and received no sympathy or no reply. And he was put into a situation, it was either he lose his home or give up his citizenship, his U.S. citizenship. So putting family first, he decided, certainly a very hard decision to make, but decided that he had no choice, but he had to give up his U.S. citizenship so he could keep his home.
Wow. Yeah, and I think something we were mentioning earlier was sort of this. Well, I guess the tax code gets it both ways. The political climate is, hey, you're overseas, so tough luck, buddy. If you want protection of the U.S., come and live in the U.S. Right? But the tax code's like, well, we don't care wherever you make money in the world, we want it. So it's like, well, are we citizens of the tax code treats us like citizens of the world, yet in actuality, FATCA treats us like third-class citizens. Mm-hmm. So that's really some of the, like the double outrage. I would say citizen taxation is kind of like the poop cake, and FATCA is sort of the poop frosting. That's how I kind of would put it all together, and it's served up for every expat,
Now, we're throwing
I
around...
haven't heard it put that way, but that is a pretty good analogy in my book.
Now, we're throwing around some terms here like expats and Americans overseas. So let's talk about the different buckets that we can sort of group people into. There's first, Keith, Americans that are overseas just temporarily, right?
Yes, that's a bucket that I would say, generally speaking, are not affected by FATCA or citizenship-based taxation.
Okay.
And the reason is that they are temporarily overseas. Their intent is to return back to the United States, maybe after 2 or 3 years of an American overseas assignment. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes the company which brings them overseas takes care of their U.S. tax compliance costs, meaning filing their U.S. tax returns, helps them set up bank accounts in whatever country they happen to be living in, even though it is more of an arduous process right now. But at least they have the backing of a company to take care of those particular issues. So they're really, like we would like to call homelanders abroad, because they're just on temporary assignment. So that bucket is probably of the population the least affected by FATCA and the U.S. practice of citizenship-based taxation.
Okay, now we have bucket.
Conversely, with Americans overseas, and I use that term specifically when we're talking about long-term, indefinite stay Americans who have left the United States for various reasons, whether it be professionally or they happen to have fallen in love with a non-American and have chosen to live in that particular country or another country, as well as Americans who have never lived in the United States, but they happen to be the offspring of an American parent or parents, and they were born overseas, but because their parent or parents satisfy the transmission of U.S. citizenship, they are deemed American, even though they never set foot in the United States.
Wow.
Is that right?
So we're talking...
Wait a second. Wait. Is that right? I didn't even know that's right. So if you're born to both U.S. parents overseas, yes, and I mean, well, you can run for president, I know, but don't you have to become naturalized at some point? Is it an automatic citizen? What? God, every day you learn something, huh?
The criteria is based on the American parent, whether it be the mother or father, on how long they were living in the United States prior to the birth of the child. And there's certain criteria that they must satisfy in order to transmit their U.S. citizenship to their children.
Wow.
And if they have satisfied that criteria, that transmission is, quote unquote, automatic, regardless of whether the parent registers that American at the U.S. Embassy or not.
And this is and I know you're going to talk about the accidental Americans as well, but this is sort of a surprise to me because over the thousands of people I've talked to with FATCA problems, overseas issues, I have never run into that fact pattern where it was somebody who was, I'm a U.S. person. My parents were born. I was born here to both U.S. parents. It's actually something that doesn't come up. So wow, these people. Now you know. I would say they really don't know. They really don't know what's going on because based on our own statistics.
Know if their parents don't know, that's a given. Mm-hmm. And I think that because of FATCA, the trend has been for American parent or parents to not register their birth at the U.S. Embassy so that their U.S. citizenship can be hidden, because otherwise it would be devastating to their lives.
Mm-hmm. All right, so we've got the long-term Americans overseas as well as non-American spouses of Americans overseas. And now, Keith, what about accidental Americans?
Well, let me just go back because it's an important other population that's associated with Americans overseas, because the American overseas who's married to a non-American spouse, that non-American spouse is also caught up in this FATCA and U.S. citizenship-based taxation issue as well, by virtue of being married to that American. Now,
now that's a lot of phone calls, a lot of meetings I've had with clients where there is a real strain between the non-U.S. spouse and the U.S. spouse, and it's like the U.S. spouse has this embarrassing problem, this terrible addiction to drugs or something that's so humiliating. And sometimes the spouse is understanding, and other times they're a little bit angry and taking it out on the spouse a little bit, and it happens. So that is definitely something that we see a lot of.
Yes, exactly. And, you were speaking of the other bucket, if you will, of accidental Americans. Mm-hmm. And, I'll give you a basic example of this exponentially growing population. You take someone, and I'll use France as an example. Mm-hmm. You take an individual who was born to French parents, because the French parents happen to be in the United States, whether it be for work or for studies. That child is born in the United States. Therefore, by virtue of being born on U.S. soil, they are considered American. They've left the United States literally in diapers, no U.S. passport. They've returned to their parents' country, for example, in this situation, France. They have lived in France, no connection to the United States. They don't even speak the language. They've studied in France. They work in France. They have nothing to do with the U.S. They don't even have a Social Security number. All of a sudden, they get a letter from their bank in France where they have a checking and savings account stating that they have been identified as a U.S. person by virtue of their place of birth.
Wow.
And that they must provide either a U.S. Social Security number, waive their privacy rights in France so that way the information on their accounts can be sent to the French tax authorities and then to the IRS under the FATCA intergovernmental agreements, or they must supply a certificate of loss of nationality, which states that they have renounced their U.S. citizenship. So as you can imagine, these individuals had no idea that they were even American. And now all of a sudden the bank is requesting information from them that they don't even have and have never had. And so they are put in this Kafka-esque situation, which, as you can imagine, is creating a serious problem in their lives and maybe in their spouses and children's lives.
Now, would they have to go through the entire process of revoking their citizenship, making the payments, all the paperwork?
Technically, they have to, and let's use, with due respect, we'll need to use the proper terms here. Technically, they would have to renounce their U.S. citizenship that they didn't even know they had, so they have to acknowledge first something that they never knew they had so they could renounce it. So they would have to file 5 years of back taxes, 6 years of foreign bank account reporting, FBARs as they're called, submitted to the Department of Treasury Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, as well as pay the $2,350 renunciation fee to the United States. And then they can renounce.
That's insane.
Now, if they happen to be older individuals, they may reach the threshold in which they would have to pay an exit tax to the United States.
Yes.
Mind you, these are people who never have had any link to the United States. None of this money was even made in the U.S.
Yeah, it's insane. So, and a lot of when you're doing 5 years of taxes, in some years there could be a large capital gain if they sold their business, and if it's a business they did themselves, their basis is zero. So it's pretty much full gain that they're paying taxes on, and then they've reinvested the money into something else that they're now paying an exit tax on for something that never touched the United States for someone who never knew they were a U.S. person.
Right, and keep in mind this money that I'm talking about. And I'm using France as an example, but it could be Canada, Germany, UK, Australia, Hong Kong, no matter where. This is money that's being sucked out of these countries into the coffers of the United States.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Hey, is it true that if you're born in an airplane flying over the United States, you're a U.S. citizen? I always wondered if that was true. If you're born in an airplane.
Yeah, good question. To my knowledge, yes. But
why not?
I
think it depends on how. Yeah, I would say it depends on how. Well, I would say airspace is regulated by the FAA up to something like 60 feet, 60 miles, something like that. So if it's an FAA-regulated airspace, the U.S. is, exercising jurisdiction over it. So there's a good chance. Right, so be careful on that. When your mom is flying somewhere, well, you can't tell them you're not born yet.
Yeah.
But as your spouse, like, hey, honey, maybe don't take the direct.
Let's go 14 hours.
Go to Mexico City and then go around the other way. Yeah.
All right.
So
now,
as you can imagine, this is a population that's being seriously adversely affected, and it's also a growing population. With every FATCA letter that's being sent out from every foreign financial institution around the world, all of a sudden, large segments of individuals who are citizens of other countries are finding that they have been identified as a U.S. person.
Amazing. And the last bucket here, Keith, is people from other countries that are currently living in the U.S.
Yes, that's another segment of the population that's being adversely affected by this. So if you happen to be an expat from another country and you're living in the United States, because of FATCA, they will be identified at their respective banks back in their home country as having U.S. indicia, as outlined in the intergovernmental agreements, which the Department of Treasury have put into place to enforce FATCA. And these banks want to rid themselves of anything that has to do with individuals who have any type of U.S. personhood or U.S. indicia. And because this expat from another country is living in the U.S. with a U.S. address, they are asked to close their account within a certain period of time, usually 30 to 90 days. The other part of that is that they're having their mortgages rescinded back in their countries of origin, as well as investment accounts closed, etc. And this is, again, another situation that consequence of this particular law.
Right. And if they're closing a bank account, if you have it in a mutual fund or something in a retirement fund, they force that liquidation. Now you're a U.S. person, right? And they're gonna force you a capital gain on that too. So not only are you closing it, now they're going to give you a tax bill. So it's just that I didn't think about that. The ones living in the U.S.
I think it's important to note on these investment accounts, whether that be outside the U.S. or in the U.S. Americans overseas are caught in a catch-22 situation because of FATCA, they're able to identify U.S. persons. So these foreign financial institutions are putting in force, as a result of Dodd-Frank, the other laws that are on the books under this particular law of Dodd-Frank, that you cannot, if you're an American living, let's say, in France or in Germany or in the UK, and you happen to be living there, but you're an American, you can't invest in that country. However, back in the U.S., you can't invest in the U.S. because you don't live in the United States.
Yeah.
So you can't invest, full stop. You just cannot do it.
Gosh. Now, Keith, obviously this is, it's literally tearing people's lives apart, as you've said. And I want to talk about how your journey brought you, you're going to actually testify in front of Congress. So how did you end up there?
Well, working with a team, a small team of individuals who have come together to prepare for these FATCA hearings. Representative Mark Meadows, who's a congressman, Republican congressman from the state of North Carolina, in fact, has introduced a bill for the repeal of FATCA. And this bill will be reintroduced in the new Congress in January. And along with this bill will be a hearing on FATCA so that the damage that is being done as a result of FATCA is out in the public forum. And I've been asked to testify as one of expert witnesses along with some other individuals, as well as just average individuals who will testify on their personal damage that's been done.
That's amazing.
Nice.
So they'll be able to share how this has affected them.
Now, I would see the opposition claiming this, to say, you can't possibly repeal FATCA because otherwise you're going to make it easier for people to cheat on their taxes. What would you say to somebody like that, Keith?
Well, the first thing I would say is with FATCA right now, it's a global stop and frisk. It's deemed everyone is guilty, and they have to prove their innocence. And the people that FATCA is actually going after right now are average Americans living overseas. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Everybody is in agreement that if you are an American living in the United States or a permanent resident living in the United States, and you are hiding money in offshore accounts, meaning outside the United States, and you're avoiding paying taxes on that particular money, you should be caught. There are laws already on the books to do that. And there is an expression that's used quite a bit in the United States called probable cause. One has to have probable cause to go after an individual, not this blanket, I would use sledgehammer, to just catch a few ants, but ruining other people's lives. And, the question is that, there are 9 million Americans overseas, according to the latest U.S. State Department figures. The majority of those people are average folk. Mm-hmm. And guess what? They do pay their taxes, and they do have offshore accounts. Mm-hmm. But their accounts are local accounts for them because they live in France, they have a French account. They live in Germany, they have a German account. So that way they can have their salaries put in. They can save just like people in the United States. And they pay taxes where they live, in France, in Germany, in the UK, in Japan.
Yeah. So I think
services they receive.
I think it's critical to be like, look, we're talking about normal Americans, and we're talking about these our retired clients. They've been paying a lot of taxes over the years, and they've been at really high rates. And now they're retired, and it's more, and it's always more. So keeping the focus on it is really just normal people. And by the way, if someone wants to do something intentional, well, look, they're really making a leap there. And no law is going to be able to stop someone from doing something criminal. If you think it can only make it more difficult. But if someone wants to move pallets of cash around, they certainly can. There's no reporting requirement. If someone wants to go do something illegal, you have to make the incentive for getting caught really painful. And right now, there are pretty terrible incentives if you get caught for not filing your reported foreign bank accounts.
Right, and most especially for those who are living overseas, the penalties are outrageous.
Yeah.
And one must keep in mind with FATCA, for example, if they were really interested in catching those wealthy millionaire, billionaire tax cheats, the thresholds would not be as low as they are.
10,000. Well, those are their donors, I think. That's why they don't want them caught all the way.
I beg your pardon?
Those are their donors, I think. They don't.
No, what I'm saying is that the thresholds are so low that ordinary individuals, Americans living overseas, are caught up in this situation.
Yeah.
If they really want to go after those rich folk.
Yeah, you would have your FBAR minimum somewhere around $1 million. There's not, the Bank Secrecy Act put that $10,000 reporting requirement in 1970. Adjusted for inflation, I think we're about $70,000 is what it should be if we adjust. If we indexed the FBAR requirements like we index everything else, it would be around $70,000. I still think that's too low. Who could run a criminal enterprise on $70,000? $1 million now, you could really do something. So I think that's really where it would be. And, from a law enforcement perspective, they're not even looking at FBARs. They don't even look at them. It's just a requirement. They're not really used as a tool for someone to say, hey, look at these FBARs we got. We should go look at these people, because the assumption is if you're filing it, you're not the one who's doing something criminal. The law was really only meant to punish the people who weren't filing them.
Right, and the focus needs to be on Americans living in the United States who have accounts outside the United States. Not the American living in Germany who has a local bank account with a checking and savings account attached.
Exactly.
Who's in compliance with their local taxing authority.
Right. Now, Keith, when is this happening? When will you be testifying in front of Congress?
Well, as of this writing, it's supposed to be, it looks like it's going to be in January after the new Congress convenes.
Got it.
So we're waiting to hear on a formal date, but we're moving forward with the appropriate preparation.
Awesome. Well, we'll make sure we update the notes on the podcast here so people can come back and check. Once we get a date, we'll post it, and we can set our DVRs to watch you on C-SPAN.
Right, exactly. As well as some other individuals who have been in this fight as well.
Oh, great.
Yes, like you said, I know you said you've got a team of people, and I can only imagine, the amount of work that everyone's putting in to do this. Yeah,
and my responsibility along with testifying is also securing the witnesses from around the world who are willing to come to Washington and to give their testimony on the damage being done into their lives.
Yeah, and you said the ex-military gentleman, will he be there?
He's actually on a plaintiff on the U.S. FATCA lawsuit.
Oh, okay.
He may not be there for this particular one, but we do have a gentleman who is a decorated military veteran who will more than likely testify. Good.
I'm glad that they're willing to share their stories. Finally, Keith, we want to talk about the new political climate. Now, here on the show, generally we don't get political. We try not to take sides.
Inadvertently, yes. Yeah.
But, obviously with a new regime taking over, it is going to affect things like FATCA and reporting requirements. What do you see happening?
Well, I'm going to start out with some just basic facts first. The DNC platform, Democratic National Committee platform, talks about fixing FATCA and makes no mention of the situation of citizenship-based taxation and the change to residency-based taxation. Let me just interject something here because I think it's important for your audience to know in case they're not aware. The U.S. is the only country in the world, aside from a small African country by the name of Eritrea, which practices citizenship-based taxation, meaning you are taxed based on your nationality of being American. The rest of the world practices residency-based taxation, meaning that where you live, that's where you pay your taxes. Full stop. However, the U.S. has this exceptional way of taxing which, as I said in the beginning of the program, has created a major problem. In fact, it has put on the front burner the problem with citizenship-based taxation. So back to the DNC platform. FATCA 6, no mention of a transition to residency-based taxation. The RNC platform, Republican National Committee platform, calls for the repeal of FATCA and the change from citizenship-based taxation to residency-based taxation for individuals. And that is just the foundation right now there. One can take a look at both platforms and see that in there.
Well, yeah, we don't want to be political, but one is clearly better than the other.
In those absolute terms, yes.
Yes.
And my intent is not going to be political in this discussion either. I'm just putting the facts down on the table. Now, having said that, the fact is that we'll be having a Republican president. We have a Republican-controlled House and Senate, and the chances are greater. Now, what that level of greaterness, if that is a word that I may use, will be is too soon to tell, because deeds, not words, is what's going to count. But there's a better chance of relief for Americans overseas and the associated affected populations than if it was the opposite with a Democrat president and a Democrat-controlled Congress.
Yeah, there'd be no chance there. There's just no chance at all.
Zero chance.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think where, over the years, if you're trying to get a sweeping law through, you put it in the tax code. They got Obamacare through by putting it in the tax code. But this is, a lot of things can happen stealthily. It's really, where what I see as a stopper, something that could stop the important reform is that if there is this sort of political narrative that erupts that, the Republicans are just trying to help people avoid taxes and we need our bigger tax base. So if that gets going, there might be some waffling Republicans who will just say, okay, we'll just stick with the status quo. So what I'm really hoping is that people can kind of see that this is not a good idea, that, taxing somewhere, this is what we have today is a logical outcome of taxing someone simply because they're a U.S. person, regardless of where the money is made. The U.S. had nothing to do with this income being made, but wants its cut. Yet the U.S. isn't giving the person a protection, and in fact is giving them punishment. So this is sort of the I hope is the end game of universal taxation. That terrible thing that was U.S. versus Tate in 1924 was the U.S. Supreme Court. Because if you look at the 16th Amendment, it doesn't mention a damn thing about universal taxation. It was just a Supreme Court decision to say, well, the government's kind of everywhere, so you should pay your taxes everywhere. That's basically what they're saying.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to note that and I think it's fair to say that the majority of people, members of Congress and the Senate, have no idea what citizenship-based taxation is doing to individuals.
Yes.
Has zero idea. Yeah. And that's why just starting with this FATCA hearing is going to be important, talking about FATCA, and of course, citizenship-based taxation is going to be coming up. I was on a conference call with a senator a few months ago, and he asked me, well, Keith, give me an example of a situation with citizenship-based taxation that is a problem. And I gave him a couple examples. I gave him the example of capital gains on house. If you are in, and I'm sorry, I'm just using France, but again, it could be Germany, anywhere else. You're in France, you buy a house, you sell it for a number of years later, you have capital gains on that house. Because you're in France and it's a primary residence, you don't pay capital gains tax on that house, and you can go and buy another house. However, to the United States, you do have to pay capital gains tax. There is an exemption to a certain degree, but still you have to pay money on non-U.S. sourced income, money that was made in France, to the United States. Mm-hmm. So that's example number one. Example number two is, and this is the case in France as well as in other countries, is there are key income taxes which are mandatory in one's country of residence, which are not recognized by the IRS. And so as a result, one is doubly taxed because they cannot apply those income taxes as a foreign tax credit. Therefore, they are doubly taxed.
Right. We see that case
And
is.
so these are, and I bring this up because there's a lot of myths out there that, oh, well, there's a U.S. tax treaty with these different countries. Yes, there is, but it does not address uniformly these situations, and it only lessens the possibility of double taxation, but it does not remove it. And there are more and more instances of double taxation.
Right. There's a lot of countries we don't have a treaty in, and then a lot of countries where the treaties are terrible, like Australia.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. And as you've spoken with Karen Alpert about that with the superannuation, et cetera, and that's just one example of other countries, countries which have terrible treaties. And I go back to saying that the details of this, people in Congress and in the Senate, they don't know anything about it, and they really need to be educated and informed.
Yeah.
Well, I'm so glad that you are going to be the one, with your team going and trying to spread the word. Your work is it's so appreciated. Keith, how can people find your Facebook group?
Well, it's easy as far as on Facebook. They just need to type in American Expatriates and find the group.
Okay.
They can just, when they get on Facebook.com, they can do a / and then American Expatriates and go straight to the group.
Okay. And if somebody wanted to reach out to you and contact you directly?
Well, they can certainly reach out to me via email, and my email address would be Keith, KEITH _ Redmond, REDMOND, @outlook.com.
Awesome. Okay, now, like I said, we only touched the tip of the iceberg today, so we'd love to have you back.
Literally, just
yes.
I mean, the passport revocation law for, seriously delinquent taxpayers. I'd love to talk to you about that. Just so many other ideas that I've seen, on your Facebook page and things that people are screaming, please talk about this. You've got to spread the word.
Let's cover that.
And I think, I briefly mentioned the U.S. FATCA lawsuits that is currently in litigation, and it's in the appeals process right at the moment. And I know that it's really important that we have individuals, Americans overseas, et cetera, who would be interested in donating to actually, please, it's for your own, on your own behalf to please, even if it's just $20 to donate. Would it be okay if I give you the link for that particular page?
Oh, yeah, please.
Absolutely.
Please do.
So it would just be FATCAlegalaction.com / donate. And there's also an email address there if anyone has any questions in regards to the lawsuit.
Okay, awesome.
But if one just does a Google search, you can see a lot of information on the lawsuit. And that's just one lawsuit. That there's other lawsuits that are occurring in Israel as a result of this, in Canada. Countries are starting to push back on the United States.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of that in the news, and that is actually good news. When other countries are sort of getting outraged. So, Keith, Thank you again for joining us. Best of luck in front of Congress in January.
Yeah.
We'll keep an eye out for the date, and maybe we'll do another episode soon in December. Because, that passport revocation, that could be happening. They're supposed to be rolling it out as of November.
And that has nothing to do with FATCA.
No, not at all.
No, it has nothing to do with FATCA, but it certainly has to do with citizenship-based taxation.
Yep.
Oh, and that is going to affect so many people's lives that live and work overseas.
Exactly, because the passport is used much in a different way and more frequently for Americans overseas than it is for Americans at home in the United States.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks again for joining us, and thanks to everyone for tuning in. If you are watching this on Facebook, you can like and comment below, and then you can follow our channel so you can get more updates, from Keith and ourselves about these really important issues. We want to thank you so much for joining us. Thanks for joining Parental Advisory, hosted by Anthony Parent, produced by Claudine Gindel, that's me, and engineered by Chris Chen. For more podcasts, visit our website at parentaladvisoryshow.com. And you can like us on Facebook to submit story ideas. We'd like to thank our sponsors, IRSMedic, the law offices of Parent and Parent, LLP, real tax attorneys for tough tax problems.